morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the session. We're going to talk about the role of AI in transforming software delivery. I'm joined by Lata from HPE and Sean from Marriott. Do you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Lata Srinivasan. I work at Hewlett Packard Enterprise in the compute cloud business. We work on building common services for scalability and performance to power our products.
And I'm Sean Corkum, Director of DevSecOps and Automation at Marriott International. I'm working on building out our software delivery pipelines and our internal developer portals.
Awesome. So to kick things off, if you could share some of your perspectives on the role of AI as you're seeing it today. Obviously there's been a lot of progress that's being made in recent times, especially in code generation and test cases and so on. But what are some of the interesting scenarios and use cases that you're seeing today? Let's start with you, Lata.
Sure, yeah. So I would say that, speaking from a developer persona, right, there's multiple different ways in which it's been really helpful. One is in, code completion, things like that. I mean, that's definitely been helpful. Or even using natural language prompts to generate a little block of code, writing unit tests, given the right type of context. Generating documentation, it's huge. A lot of developers love the fact that they don't have to think about writing documentation. That's huge, right? There's that, and then also in general being able to also bridge the gap between dev and DevSecOps, right? So developers, typically application developers, want to focus more on writing the code and not so much. They also want to be operating, but they don't want to think too much about the operational aspects of it. And helping them bridge the gap between the two has been huge in helping them understand this is how it's working in production or working in staging, or help me debug this. I think that's been huge.
Yeah, and kind of going along with that, it's that same bit of helping them remove some of those toil tasks and kind of the everyday things of when it gets deployed, what's going on, why do I have to dig through this stack trace to figure out why did the deployment fail. When it comes to the security scanning results and static code analysis, being able to provide them that fast feedback loop and ideally giving them the answer on how to fix these problems as they come up.
Yeah, so it's interesting how you mentioned about the DevOps toil and related to security issues and other aspects as well. A lot of the chatter that we hear in recent times has been around code generation, right? And a lot of progress is obviously being made in that space. But how do you sort of look at this across efficiency across the software delivery lifecycle? Like, what are some of the aspects that you think AI can help with in every facet of software delivery? Let's start with you, Sean.
I think that's kind of the next frontier into this space, and it's starting to pop up. It's not as matured as like the AI coding assistants, which have been around for a couple of years now and are still maturing themselves. But really, kind of after commit and it's pushed back to your source control, being able to be more integrated from there through the production deploy, and giving them that feedback, because like you were saying, as developers, we love the fun bit of creating the new functionality and writing the new business logic. We don't want to have to go back and say, oh, well, my Docker image has X vulnerabilities and now I need to update whatever packages to maintain compliance. Like, that's not the fun bit. This tool seems to be something that's going to really start to be able to help in that space. And that's kind of the big gap that's been in the whole lifecycle management of that's been missing. We've been focusing so much on the code generation and helping with the docs, because I hate writing documentation as much as the next developer.
Yeah.
But having some help in that middle space, I think that's going to be a huge boost to productivity. Really free them up to spend the time having the fun, the fun part.
Right. And to build on what Sean just said, right? I think being able to help augment developers' knowledge with, this is how you do more optimization of this piece. You've already written this piece of code. This is how you optimize it. Or these are where the potential PII leaks can be. You have this little debug statement you're thinking it's at the debug level, but if it gets leaked into production, that's a problem. Or being able to really help them cut the figure out where's the noise, where's the signal, and helping them figure that out. I think that's going to be there's a huge potential there, and that space is still not fully developed yet, but there's a lot of potential to develop tools.
Same thing with like the day two operations. You know, you've got all these databases you need to manage and update schemas and whatnot. Having it help in that space too will be huge. I mean, it's not fun to do all the time.
All handling migrations, right?
Yeah.
Who loves to think about that?
You've got a break change that you have to work through and going through that process.
Yeah. Or versioning code. I mean, there's a lot of potential in those beyond the life cycle of initial code development. There's a huge potential there.
Absolutely. So, and when you think about how this kind of plays out to the different stakeholders in the organization, you know, developers, architects, designers, documentation writers, like product managers, they're essentially, you know, everybody who are involved in this process of software delivery. Like, how do you think about, you know, how their lives are going to change? Like, have you already started seeing some of these manifest in different ways, or what kind of progress have you seen being made by these?
I want to take this. So I think so far it's been mostly on the developer side of the fence. Haven't quite seen it. It would be lovely if it permeated to the other functions yet. But so far, the developers have, you know, basically from code generation and code, you know, completion and things like that we talked about earlier. In terms of knowledge management, creation, or customer support or product management, I think there is potential to generate material that looks at the product and generates training material, or looks at the product and generates user-facing documentation, or things like that. But I think haven't seen that emerge yet, but I'm sure, you know,
I've been starting to find it, and it's kind of happening organically. It's not that there's a specific tool that's being marketed for that, but we have multiple, you know, open, you know, generative AI tools that we can interface with.
Right.
And I think people that are in those positions are starting to see, like, okay, maybe I can leverage this to kind of get the bulk of this kind of done, and then I can go through and add the contextual knowledge within my organization, and it's starting to help them move a little faster too. It's definitely not as wide, but I'm starting to see and hear from some other folks that, like, you know, a question I've heard from one of my colleagues that I'd love to steal from her in interviews is, you know, how has ChatGPT changed the way you work? And it gets you kind of thinking of, like, no, how has it kind of changed what I'm doing? And I'm hearing more people say that kind of, like, well, I use it to kind of create the bulk of something, and then I go through and edit. You know, it's like that. It's not quite trust but verify, but it's trusting it to do the toil part of writing that, and then you go through and verify and add that kind of extra knowledge and edit it from there.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess in the process, obviously, a lot of content that might get created could potentially be, you know, hallucinated content, or it could be content that has to be, you know, to your point, like, has to be verified, right? And you have to build the right security guardrails around it, make sure there's no, like, data leakages and, you know, security issues. So how do you think about those aspects? Is that something which you know, is keeping you up at night today, or is that something which, you know, you feel like you've got a good handle of? You know, let's start with
and I wouldn't quite say it's keeping me up at night, but it is something that we are all very cognizant about. I would say that definitely being mindful of the fact that you're not only responsible for your corporate IP, your data, your customers' data, and on how that could potentially play out. I think it's important, and so training people on how efficient usage of that is very important, and also building the guardrails to make sure that if, you know, there's a slip up, you have enough, you know, belts and suspenders to catch it before it hits production or whatever, right? So I think that's the main thing that we need to focus on, and haven't seen too much tooling there yet. It's been mostly, you learn and you figure it out. But I think that's something that's going to be important.
Absolutely. I mean, security happens in layers, so you have to have multiple kinds of checkpoints to put those guardrails in to make sure you don't accidentally shoot yourself in the foot.
Right.
It can be really easy to do. Thankfully, a lot of the partners that are creating these models, like they're just as worried about this as we are. So they're trying to do the same and do things like, there's zero data retention and stuff like that. Putting in processes on their side to ensure that they're not training their models on your data unless it's something you contractually work out with them. But yeah, I mean, security in this aspect is very much something front in mind for me, because I want to make sure I'm not introducing something into my ecosystem that's going to cause a problem down the line either.
Yep.
And some of these use cases, the impact of these use cases, it depends on the kind of data that you feed into it, right? The kind of prompts that you use to extract information out of it, and so on. And for that to be possible, you need a tech stack which supports this at several layers, right? In some cases, you might own the models, you might own the data. In some cases, you might depend on a vendor to help you in that journey. So how do you see like the modern tech stack evolve in light of all of this? Like, what are some of the aspects that you think people should think about?
Personally, for me, with how the models are changing, whether you're building them in-house or you're partnering with a vendor, which a lot of us are, like creating and running these models, it's not an inexpensive thing to do.
Yes.
There's definitely an economy of scale. But making sure you have some kind of flexibility, worked in. The different models, they all have their strengths and weaknesses. Some are better for some things, some are better for others. So understanding your business case of what are you trying to accomplish, and scoping it down to kind of the few that you want to work with. Like, you don't want chaos and just say, hey, everybody go pick whatever model you want to work with. You need to kind of keep some kind of guardrail around that. Otherwise, the security and compliance can become an issue, and management of everything becomes an issue. But as you're building out your differentiation on top of, especially these third-party models, ensuring that you're keeping in the back of your mind, like, these are going to be changing a lot over the next couple of years. What their capabilities are going to be maturing a ton. Making sure that you have the ability to, if you need to in a year, change out for something else. It really gives you having that flexibility will ensure that you're always kind of going towards that best of breed. If it's something internal like a DevOps tool, like if you've got an AI coding assistant or something, whether it's like ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude 2 or Meta's CodeLlama that's come out, whatever it may be, they're all evolving, and they're all giving you different kinds of information back and different levels of quality. It's whichever one works the best with your organization's tech stack, being able to have that changeability, I think, is a huge plus.
Yeah, and actually, I think building a layer of abstraction between how you're consuming it will help you provide that level of, you can switch it out at a future time. And then also being able to evaluate the quality, right? Like you touched upon an important point, which is the effectiveness of these models is something that only you know, because you know the business context in which you're using it. So augmenting your tech stack to be able to evaluate each of these also will become very critical.
Yeah, so that's a great point. I think like when you talk about evaluation, you also want to figure out like how you quantify the business impact of some of this, right? I mean, oftentimes even we hear from customers saying, "Hey, help us make a case to our leadership in how is this going to change our lives?" And there's a certain degree of incremental value that one can achieve through automation. I think to your point, right? And beyond automation, like there's what is the incremental value that generative AI can help with? So, what are your perspectives on measuring the business impact of AI? Like, how does one even do that?
The $1 million question: how do you measure the effectiveness of these tools? Yeah. It's tough. There's only so much kind of quantitative that you can measure, and I think you actually do need to keep some qualitative in the mix here.
Yeah, I agree.
We were talking before, like developer happiness is. While that's really difficult to measure in its own, it does play a part because it's very well shown that employees that are happy do better at their job, right. And if you can make their lives easier, you end up with that better product at the end.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think you want to anchor this in any kind of customer outcome, right? Ultimately, it all matters whether you're delivering something of value to the customer for them to, and so they should. At some level, you shouldn't even know that there was an AI involved in the creation of this particular thing, right? I think that's how that's your ultimate business metric to measure this by.
Yeah, are you delivering value for your end customer?
End customer, exactly.
And are you delivering it quickly and safely?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think a lot of the stats that's been published, at least to my knowledge, has been around improving developer efficiency or coding efficiency by X%. Or trying to improve productivity by 30% or 40% or what have you, right? Like, whereas you're sort of alluding to how this impacts the end customer, and how do you take that and quantify and make a business case out of it.
You have to kind of take a holistic view of looking at this, the whole thing. if you hone in on one specific part and don't take a step back, you lose the forest from the trees, kind of that aspect of going on. You do still need to be able to measure down to those
Along the
smaller
way.
pieces,
Yeah,
but start out looking higher and then drill down.
exactly.
Seems to be a little bit better. Like, if you were like to really push me on something like, hey, what's a really kind of quantitative measure? Like I kind of have to default back to like the Dora metrics. Those are very well proven. There's been a number of books that show
Right.
all the studies on those that they are markers for high functioning engineering groups. But even that only takes you so far within the realm of what these tools are starting to do. It is something that if you need a number on paper, like you can use those that help, but you can't just specifically focus on that. There's more to
There's more
this
to
space.
it because I think you also want to focus on, we talked about it earlier, like quality versus quantity. So you don't want it to be a measure like lines of code or number of unit tests or number of integration tests, because you may have 10 last year and 100 with with the AI system, but who's to tell that they're better, right?
Yeah.
Like who's to tell that they're catching all the corner cases? That's still still up in the air. So I think we should
Yeah, so quality versus quantity, and and look at Dora kind of with automation, without automation, and or maybe with automation and generative AI. Like, what is the incremental
Right.
improvements one can achieve beyond that? Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thinking about the stakeholders, I think going back to what you were saying earlier, Lata, about the skills. I'm sure we have developers, DevOps engineers, architects, engineering leaders, even who are sort of listening to this. And what are some skills that might be helpful for the teams to be able to brave this new world of AI, right? Like what? Obviously, you have to take a lot of this and internalize it to your use case. Like you could be an SRE, you could be a developer, you could be a doc writer even, and you have to internalize this to kind of how it plays out to your specific scenarios. But what are some of the skills that you would advise, and in terms of even what you have seen in your teams?
You want to take that?
Sure. I mean, some of it is you just need to start trying it. Especially when you're starting to figure out like how to get the best out of it, understanding the right prompts. It's something you have to play around with a little bit and understand like what is it, what are you trying to get out of it, and making sure you're giving it the right questions. That's really kind of the toughest part. It's like learning anything new. It's almost if you've been doing Java development for 20 years, like okay, now go learn Go. Like it's not wildly different, but it is still different, and you need to kind of learn something new about it. Same thing with this. It's learning how to best interact with it. AI doesn't have all that kind of back knowledge of what you're trying to accomplish. It just knows what you asked it.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. AI cannot read your mind, right?
Yeah.
So training yourself to give it as much context so that you can actually benefit from it, I think is important. And also to be able to discern. The second step is after that, the feedback, right? The human in the loop. How do you discern what it's giving you is of value to you?
Yeah.
I think being able to do that is really important, and which is where I think a more junior developer might take some time to learn that, and a more senior developer will be able to quickly spot like, no, I think that's wrong, or that's not quite what I wanted, right? So I think that's important. That's important to learn.
So in light of this, how do you compare the trends that's happening in the past couple of years in Gen AI to what we've seen earlier in say SaaS and cloud, CI/CD, DevOps even, or like how is this trend different from the others?
I would say that it's similar in the sense that it's very much like another augmentation enhancement, another set of big tools, but of course with a large corpus of information, right? That's the big difference here. And also, I think with the ability to do a lot more multimodal, I think there's it actually, in some ways, levels the playing field for a lot of people. It's making it more accessible. So you can interact with it in any format that is comfortable to you. So that way, it's really good. So I think and we're yet to see. I mean, it's another platform, if you will, that can generate a whole bunch of new, interesting ideas. I'm excited about what the world world can bring with this. But I think that's how I see it. I think it's a huge there's a lot of potential to change things up. But I think it's still an augmenter. Ultimately, you're still delivering products to your customers, and that's where the real value is going to come from.
Yeah, and kind of going along with that too, like from a DevOps perspective and automation, I do see a lot of the hesitancy around people that we've seen over the years as different things have come out. And I know I'm going to be dating myself by saying this, but it's kind of like I remember when Hudson came on the scene. Like previously, we were building everything locally. Everybody had a bunch of different shell scripts that was maintained to certain degrees to get things built and tested and deployed. And then Hudson came in and gave us a more centralized way to do that. And people got worried because they were very used to how they had been operating, and they were worried like, was my job going to be secure or something like that? And as that kind of matured and eventually became Jenkins, they realized they weren't. It was freeing them up to do something else, and started giving them space to burn down like other tech debt that had come up. And as that process came out, GitHub Actions and GitLab CI came about, and all the different tools are out there. We've seen kind of that same aspect of being able to be more highly automated and getting closer to true CD, which a lot of places are able to do at this point of commit the code. Once the PR is accepted, you never think about it again unless some failure happens. But people are always worried because it is something new. It is something we all need to kind of learn and learn how to get the best out of it. But again, like you've been saying, it's an augmenter. It's something to help you, give you more time to focus on the things that are of higher value.
Yeah.
What use cases are you most excited about? If you were to look at the crystal ball and look at 3 years or 5 years from now, right? This toil is just going to completely disappear. It's not going to exist anymore because I can get so much more value now. Like what's going to be, what are your aspirational use cases moving forward?
Oh, I am so excited about the once it's committed and getting it through the software delivery cycle, that space, because that's where the tool is just starting to come into play. There's a few people starting to work on that. It's still not super mature, but I think in a couple of years, absolutely will be. And dealing with that whole why did my CI step fail? Why did my build fail? Why did my deployment fail? Instead of me having to go through the different stack traces and dig through CI logs to figure out what happened, because it worked locally, but it failed in the pipeline. Not having to do that anymore and have the tool say, hey, saw it failed, here's why it failed.
Exactly.
And even more importantly, here's the fix.
Right.
So you don't have to do that. You can get the PR, you can validate it, because again, trust but verify, and then you can go back and you can get back to the fun stuff of writing new code and creating.
Yeah. No, I'm excited about similar stuff, and also building on some of my personal pet areas, which is scalability and performance. Like being able to even look at optimizations and sustainability also. Like this is a more sustainable way of writing this code. This is a more sustainable way of writing this Lambda function or whatever. That I think there's a huge potential there, and very excited about what can come there. And that's all post merge, git merge, and then now what happens, right? So
I think it's interesting how we're sort of talking about how there's a lot of progress that's being made across some of the creative aspects around code today, but obviously there's so much of toil that exists across beyond that, from performance, security, scalability, and so on. And unless you kind of look at this holistically and refactor this, you're not going to be able to face those, get those returns, right?
And I think once we start burning down that toil aspect too, that starts freeing us up to go back to that tech debt that we all know that we're dragging along, and we're just never really able to prioritize.
Yeah.
We're always going back and forth, that balancing act of new feature, burn down the tech debt, and it's tough to get that right. But having something that removes the hours of week that are getting spent on these toil tasks, that's going to start freeing us up more to burn down that tech debt, which all of us we all want to do. But like I said, it's been really difficult to find that balance.
Yep, agreed.
Closing thoughts. Anything that's scary about AI, or anything that you would caution folks about?
Yeah, I think first of all, thing to note is context is king, right? Like context truly matters, so that's important. I think scary is not so much as caution. Go into it with anything else, any other tool or technology. Go into it with knowing that this is a tool that you're in control of how you use it, and be mindful of not just your IP, your data, your customer IP is very important. And then play with it, and then learn, and then it becomes part of your fabric.
Yeah, as I've mentioned a couple times, you have to trust but verify. So like, as you're getting different code in, I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but at one point, like, was writing something in Node and got a suggestion for a package that literally didn't exist. While it hasn't happened for a while, little things like that are going to come up. These tools are constantly evolving. The models are constantly getting updated. Use them, try them, play around with them, figure out how they can help you best, and lean into how it's helping you best. But always, double check, make sure it's actually what you expected it to do before you release it into production.
I agree. Yeah.
Awesome. Sean, Latha, thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming out here and sharing your perspectives. And hope you all enjoy the rest of the session, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.